Crisis Insights, and I'm your host, Tom James. In this episode, we're continuing our series on fossil fuels and how it's transported around the world.
The use of petroleum products continues to grow around the world. According to the International Energy Agency Oil Market Report, they estimate in 2015 the world is consuming about 93 million barrels of oil or liquid fuel per day. With the rising need for these products, there's an increase for potential errors to be made. With errors can come disaster.
Disasters are measured by their intensity, magnitude, lasting legacy, death toll, and the economic cost of the damage it caused. In this episode, we're going to continue to examine the circumstances of the second largest oil spill in the United States history, for the vessel the Exxon Valdez.
On March 24, 1989, the Exxon Valdez departed Valdez, Alaska, and was heading south in Prince William Sound. The vessel was directed out of the shipping lane to avoid ice floes and continued south directly towards Fly Reef. At 12:04 local time, it ran aground.
We fetched up on the ground and evidently only get some oil.
The first rescue vessel arrived on scene around 3:30, and an estimated 500 gallons of oil per second was leaking. The very slow response by Exxon, Alaska, and the government allowed the oil to spread. No response team was in Belize to attend the scene. The team was disbanded 8 years previous. Teams had to come from Texas and as far away as England. The volume of oil spilled from the official ship records was approximately 55 million gallons, and it eventually spread over 1,300 miles, or 2,100 kilometers of coastline, and 11,000 square miles, or 28,000 square kilometers of ocean. The impact of wildlife included 500,000 seabirds, 3,000 otters. Over half the wildlife would perish. The impacts to fish and seabed vegetation cannot be measured. 3 days after the Exxon Valdez ran aground, a major windstorm pushed the oil slick over 40 miles and the oil up over the shorelines by 6 feet. The impacts for the Prince of William Sound made it an ecological disaster. On July 31, 1990, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board released its report on the grounding of the Exxon Valdez. The National Transportation Safety Board identified safety issues including the vessel's navigation watch, the human factors, manning standards, the company's drug and alcohol testing and rehabilitation program, the vessel traffic services, oil spill response, and drug and alcohol testing for investigations. The NTSB determined the probable cause of the grounding of the Exxon Valdez was the failure of the third mate to properly maneuver the vessel because of fatigue and excessive workload, the failure of the master of the ship to provide proper navigational watch because of impairment from alcohol, the failure of the Exxon Shipping Company to provide a fit master and arrested insufficient crew for the vessel, the lack of an effective vessel traffic service because of inadequate equipment and manning levels, inadequate personal training, and deficient management oversight, and the lack of an effective pilotage services. To analyze the Exxon Valdez spill, one should understand the process used in the development of the response, which was supposed to happen, but in this case didn't. In order to write meaningful plans, a process or model has to be followed to ensure they are effective to address the given crisis. CMTV follows the 6 R's developed by our CEO and President, Jeff Williams, a retired firefighter. In this diagram, the first R refers to the readiness of the organization to address the crisis. In this stage, the risks and hazards are identified, and the plans are developed to mitigate those risks. In order to ensure the plans are effective, they must be tested with training, namely information sharing, tabletop exercises, drills, and full-scale exercises with people in the field to try to determine if the goals and tasks can be achieved. This activity is the second R, entitled Response. Here is when predetermined actions are taken to mobilize resources to reduce the impacts of the disaster. The next R is Re-energize, to ensure the response is sustainable. A 3-year cleanup of the Exxon Valdez requires many resources to remain energized. The next R is Recovery, which is moving towards normal operations. After a major event, normal operations may not be like what it was before the event. The next R is Re-examine. With this process, the response is evaluated and issues are identified. The final R is Remodel. adjusting the plans to meet the requirements of the event in approved efficiency. Many times during a response, things are not going to go as required by the plans. The plans are re-examined and remodeled. Note that many of these processes can happen at the same time. The U.S. federal government analyzed the Exxon Valdez spill at the request of the President. This report to the President of the United States was prepared by the National Response Team and dated May 1989. It examined the preparedness and prevention by examining the national response system and the respective contingency plans from the companies responsible: Alaska Pipeline, Exxon, Port Authority, the State of Alaska, and the U.S. Coast Guard Marine Safety Office. They also reviewed the effects on the environment, energy, the Alaskan economy, and the health of the population living in Prince William Sound. The planning was taking place even before the approval of the federal government was obtained. Great promises were made. Take a look at this report.
When a pipeline to bring oil from northern Alaska to Valdez was approved in 1973, the oil industry and the federal government promised to make safety a priority.
The Alaska pipeline's on its way. The environment will be saved.
The government initially supported double-hulled tankers and a high-tech navigation system in Valdez.
We were given blanket assurances about safety and spills. In retrospect, I erred in not making sure that what was said was not put in writing.
Those promises never materialized, and when the state of Alaska passed its own safety law, the oil industry sued, saying the law infringed on federal authority.
The court threw out the state's plan, so no double-hulled tankers, much more freedom to determine where the navigation channel would be.
The readiness of all parties was minimal, and they had become complacent with safety measures. The captain departed the vessel while it was loading, and throughout the time away had consumed alcohol beverages before returning to duty. Policies and procedures for the consumption of alcohol before taking command of the Exxon Valdez were not followed, or the practice should not have been acceptable. The third mate was tasked with assisting of the loading of the vessel, then taking it through Prince William Sound without investigational watch, extra eyes to ensure the vessel's location, and free of threats. The Coast Guard was to monitor the vessel, ensure it was safely on course. They didn't have the equipment nor the personnel to monitor and provide directions for ships coming into Prince William Sound. There was no pilot vehicles to ensure the safest route for the tanker was available. The U.S. National Response System is composed of 14 federal agencies that make up the National Response Team. They had the responsibility to ensure the coordination of federal, regional, and local plans for disaster. The Alaska Pipeline Service Company was responsible for having response teams and equipment, including a 5-hour object for any spill response. But the teams were disbanded 8 years previous, and much of the equipment was inoperable. The government plans had different agencies responsible depending on the size of the spill. So where were the checks and balances to ensure the safety of the environment and the health of the people living in Prince William Sound? The economic impact to the region and the Alaska economy was and remains tied to the American thirst for oil. The report to the President of the United States that 80% of the Alaskan oil economy is tied to the oil industry. Was this the case for the need for oil outweighing the need for safety? The impact to Exxon was vast. Many protests and marches against their involvement in the oil spill were held throughout the world. Many Exxon customers boycotted Exxon stations and even cut up their credit cards. The environmental impacts caused by the vast volume of oil spilling to Prince William Sound made the cleanup hard to understand and manage. The responders' first priority focused on the waterborne oil, followed by the oil that was washed up on shore. The scientific team who provided guidance for oil and chemical spill cleanup was NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and their Office of Response and Restoration HAZMAT. Their report made international news.
Good evening. Cleanup operations to limit environmental damage from the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska may have made it worse.
Powerful jets of hot seawater sprayed on at least 200 miles of fouled Alaskan shoreline. But the technique may have done more environmental harm than good. That, at least, is the finding of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a leading agency in the cleanup effort.
Basically, the beach was being sterilized. I had been working in oil spills for many, many years and had seen a number of examples of where a beach was oiled, and even with a heavy oiling, there were still many things alive on the beach. And as the recovery progressed and some of the oil was removed, those things that were alive on the beach and stayed alive were part of the recolonization of the beach. So as I watched the aggressive steam cleaning taking place and realized that the beaches were being sterilized, I was very concerned that there would be no populations of any kind left on those beaches that would begin that recovery process after the oil was removed. The Exxon Valdez was an event that in history, most anyone I talked to that was, say, the age of 10 and beyond remembers very distinctly.
There's still oil in Prince William Sound 20 years later, and in some places quite a bit.
It just happened to be the Exxon Valdez. It just happened to be Exxon's ship. It could have been Arco's, it could have been BP's, it could have been anybody's ship. The reason the spill occurred is the system had deteriorated to the point where oversight was lax.
There's a lot of interest in sort of revisiting, 20 years later, what have we learned? What still needs to be done, if anything?
I'm starting to see that we're falling back into this complacency that existed before the oil spill.
Part of the long-term process to document the physical and biological consequences of both the oil and the cleanup. It uses oil fade monitoring with biological and chemical studies. Most of the life, such as seaweed, barnacles, and snails, recovered after 4 years. Pockets of oil could be found on some beaches 20 years later. The cleanup cost $2 billion over 3 years with 1,300 workers, 1,000 vessels, 100 aircraft, and they only recovered 5% of the oil that was spilled. Another $1 billion was dedicated towards research. So what should you take away from this episode? Don't be complacent. Identify the risks and hazards at your home or work. Take precautions to minimize the risk. Make plans, practice them, re-examine them, and remodel them, and practice them again. One thing we should not do as Alaska, Exxon, Traffic Services, and others did: be complacent.
And that concludes this episode of Crisis Insights. Please join us again on CMTV, Crisis Management Television. Okay, folks, it's over. So what are you still doing here? Go prepare. Okay, see ya next time. CMTV.